Johnson Attorneys Group, protecting the rights of our clients and their families.
So I represent those who are injured. And so that is either they were injured in a car accident or plane crash or they fell. We've represented people who've been hurt at Disneyland. Um, Anytime that there's some sort of injury or death. And so I represent a lot of families, spouses, or children of those who have been killed in accidents. And so anytime that there's some sort of negligence going on is when I come into play. It's really hard. Accidents and injuries are the worst thing because unless you've experienced it, you don't really understand how it is. And most people haven't experienced it. Most people just, maybe a little fender bender here and there, but most don't experience those injuries that never go away. And so my goal has always been to help the clients have closure on that. Because we all know an aunt or an uncle who's older and they say, "Oh, I remember 30 years ago I had this accident and I've never been the same." Well, that's not what we want. My goal has always been resolution of the injury. And granted, sometimes the injuries are so catastrophic that the client can't get 100%, but we try to get the client pretty dang close if we can. I can't give you specifics because of confidentiality purposes, but I remember one client was the injuries were just catastrophic. I mean, I can't even describe how bad they were. And there was no hope. The client was never going to be able to work again. And depression set in, of course. And at the end of the day, what that client was able to do, even though with the resolution of the case, the client was never going to have to work again, that client, we were able to get that client back to a job because the client wanted to work. And so we were able to help the client get back and work. And obviously, the client was way happier. The depression was gone. The client felt a sense of just satisfaction that the client was able to get to that point. And it's hard not to say he or she because I can't say that, but that that brought me joy. So a lot of the firms, I mean, we see it all day long. They're on billboards. They've got lots of TV commercials. They've got they're on buses now. There's a lot that are on the radio. Um, so a lot of firms have to pay for advertising. And granted, I advertise as well, but most firms have to pay for the advertising and settle the cases quickly to pay for the advertising. And that's where I'm different. I don't settle my client down the road or down the river. I make sure, number one, that my client gets well, and number two, we resolve the case after. The one thing I insist, even to this day, is that I speak to every single client when they call into my firm. So any potential client, I will sit down and I will talk to them and go through it before I accept the case. And that is way different than most because most firms don't even have a lawyer speak to the potential client anymore. But I insist on speaking to each and every client that I'm going to accept into the firm. And that's where I stand. And it's completely different than most. It's so important because that's where the building blocks to help plan a case because, not every case is the same. And you have to have a plan. And so that's what I do is as I'm speaking to the client, sometimes for like last night, I was on the phone for an hour. What happens is at the end of that call, I already have a plan that I'm going to implement on that client's case. And so it's so important. And that's where most firms fall, is that they just treat them like anyone else. All right, let's send them to this doctor and let's do that. But that's not how it is. Yes, they need to go to the doctors and get better, but there's a plan, and there has to be one at the very beginning. I think most people just think the personal injury lawyer just settles the case. And that is the case with some. Um, that's the misconception. At least for me, I take an active approach, as we've been discussing. I am very proactive. I don't want my client to go to a doctor and the doctor just say, here's some meds, come back in 6 months. Well, that's just putting a band aid on an injury. And so I take an active approach and I help my clients, I lead them through that process and guide them. If they need to see another doctor, um, then we have a discussion on what type of doctor potentially they could go and see. Because we want to make sure that they get the best medical care at the end of the day. And there's a lot of lousy doctors and therapists out there, lots. And what I make sure is that my clients don't find those people. I make sure that my clients get to the very best specialist because we don't want them to be in some dark spiraling hole and never be able to get out with their injuries. We want to make sure that they're lifted up and they get to the best doctors and therapists and so forth and get to that point where now we can resolve the case. I've done a lot over the years. I remember there was a new procedure that really was promising, and I flew to Florida. And I met with the doctor and surgeon who were performing that procedure, and I wanted to make sure that if I was going to recommend that to a client, that I understood it and that I could put my stamp of approval on it. And so, you do much more for these clients. There's a lot of different research. In a sense, yes, the doctors are there, but at the same time, we're not just protecting the clients against the insurance companies, we're protecting them against the doctors too, to some degree. Because there's a lot of doctors who will do things that and recommend things that aren't necessary. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when I resolve their case, they need to be able to enjoy their money, not pay for more medical bills. And that's why at the very inception of a case, when I'm on the phone with the client, for at the very first call, I have a conversation with them and I tell them, look, if you're the client that just wants some money, go to another lawyer. Because if you're not willing to get better, I'm not the lawyer for you. And I find over the years, there's not a lot of those people anymore. Most people do understand that they want to get better and they need help. You can't just go to your primary care physician and the primary care physician sends you to all these miraculous doctors. That's not how it goes anymore. They have their specialty and they may know someone, in their building to refer you to, but that's not enough. There's specific injuries from these accidents that need to be addressed. And you just can't go to any doctor. You need to put forth your effort and and do what's necessary to get better. And so that's why it's really we have a team approach. Yes, we have a team at JAG, but we are right side by side with the client and kind of we're going together. And if we do that, then my experience is the client is just as happy as can be because they find resolution to the injuries. And then obviously, everyone enjoys the money because, you did go through all that pain and suffering. You did have those injuries and, you should be compensated. And so I fight real hard to get the maximum amount of money. And so, yes, the injury is important, but the money is super important as well. And I fight like teeth and nail to get that money for them.